In recent weeks, tensions on the global economic stage have been rising, increasingly resembling not a trade dispute, but a strategic confrontation between two systems. The new tariff package announced by Donald Trump against China has triggered a large-scale response from the BRICS alliance, where Beijing is one of the key players. If talk of de-dollarization was previously more declarative, it is now rapidly moving into a practical phase. Behind the scenes, far from public cameras, preparations are underway for an economic maneuver that could reshape the global financial architecture. Insiders close to the BRICS negotiation groups say that member states are rapidly drafting a plan to shift from the dollar to the yuan and gold in settlements, while developing alternative payment channels capable of bypassing the American control system. Washington is fully aware of this, which is why Trump's latest actions are not accidental, but a preemptive move aimed at containing the coming shift. The U.S. administration has announced new tariffs on a wide range of Chinese goods, from industrial equipment and steel to consumer electronics. This is not the first round of the tariff war, but the stakes are now much higher. The White House stated that these measures are meant to protect American jobs and stop China's unfair practices. But in Beijing, these formulations are seen as a cover for a geo-economic offensive. China's economy has long been the backbone of global supply chains, and the new tariffs hit precisely at these key links, destabilizing export-oriented industries and creating pressure on currency markets. In response, Beijing quickly activated mirror measures targeting U.S. exports, including agricultural products, aviation components, and energy resources. All of this is accompanied by sharp rhetoric from officials and demonstrative statements through state-controlled media. But the main part of the response is unfolding not on the surface, but deeper, within financial structures, intergovernmental agreements, and reserve strategies. According to data published by reputable outlets, including Bloomberg and the Financial Times, BRICS is rapidly finalizing a plan to conduct settlements in national currencies, primarily in yuan, and to create a gold-backed international payment platform. Working groups within the alliance are no longer discussing a hypothetical BRICS currency, but are already testing exchange protocols and developing infrastructure to bypass SWIFT. In Beijing and Moscow, central banks continue to actively increase gold reserves, converting part of their dollar assets into physical gold. This process has been underway for months, but has accelerated significantly. A key element of this shift is the so-called BRICS Pay project, an alternative payment gateway intended to serve as the core of the new system. Pilot versions of the platform are already operating in a limited format between several member states, and according to sources close to the technical teams, this infrastructure is expected to be fully operational by 2026. In parallel, discussions are underway on issuing settlement instruments partially backed by gold, allowing BRICS countries to hedge currency risks and strengthen confidence in the new channels. For the United States, these steps represent a direct threat to the global dominance of the dollar. American financial power is built on three pillars: the liquidity of treasury bonds, the network dependence of global trade on the dollar, and infrastructural control through SWIFT and dollar clearing systems. If BRICS succeeds in building a parallel architecture that is both viable and scalable, U.S. sanctions and tariff pressure will lose part of their force. Washington understands this, which is why Trump's tariffs are seen by many analysts not merely as an economic move, but as a preemptive action in the fight to preserve monetary hegemony. Beijing, however, appears ready for a long game. Chinese banks are already expanding the use of the yuan in cross-border settlements with BRICS partners and countries of the global south. The share of the yuan in international payments, according to SWIFT data, has risen to record levels over the past year. Russia, cut off from the Western financial system by sanctions, has effectively become a testing ground for new settlement mechanisms. India, despite its complex relationship with China, is actively joining swap line mechanisms that make it possible to bypass the dollar. Brazil is discussing with Beijing the possibility of shifting a significant part of its bilateral trade into yuan and reals, while South Africa is negotiating the integration of its financial institutions into alternative channels. Insiders familiar with the content of recent BRICS finance ministers' meetings claim that after Trump's tariff announcements, the alliance began an accelerated process of finalizing a roadmap. A transition to a new currency architecture, previously discussed with a horizon of 2030, may now be implemented in a compressed time frame of the next 3 to 5 years. This means that for the first time since the post-war era, the United States is facing a coordinated attempt by the world's largest developing economies to undermine the dollar from within the global system. At the same time, anxiety is growing in American political circles. Several former Treasury and Federal Reserve officials have stated in interviews with leading business media that the threat of de-dollarization is no longer theoretical. BRICS statements are no longer perceived as political rhetoric, but are backed by concrete actions, investments, and technological solutions. Whereas previous alternative currency initiatives were hindered by a lack of trust and infrastructure, BRICS now possesses both the economic weight and digital capabilities to challenge the dollar's dominance. Simultaneously, military tensions are also rising. Washington views China's economic steps in conjunction with its active policy in the Asia-Pacific region and its strengthening strategic ties with Russia and the Global South. American think tanks are warning that if BRICS succeeds in implementing its de-dollarization plans, it will inevitably lead to reduced demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, higher interest rates, and a weakened ability of the United States to finance its deficits. Trump, in turn, is betting on sharply increasing tariff pressure, hoping that the economic costs will force Beijing and its allies to retreat. Yet it increasingly appears that this time, China and its partners are prepared to respond not symmetrically, but systemically, creating conditions under which the dollar itself loses part of its global functions. Observers note that behind-the-scenes consultations between BRICS countries have taken on extraordinary intensity in recent weeks. Meetings are taking place not only at the level of ministers and central bank governors, but also between the largest state-owned corporations, which are effectively becoming the vanguard in preparing for a potential financial restructuring. Chinese banks have begun expanded testing of new cross-border settlement systems in cooperation with Russian and Indian institutions, and these projects are being conducted under strict confidentiality. According to information that has leaked to the media, several major energy contracts have already been concluded with settlements in yuan and gold, bypassing the dollar entirely. Brazilian agricultural exporters are preparing to shift part of their shipments to Asia to alternative payment schemes to reduce their exposure to fluctuations in the American currency. What is unfolding before our eyes is not just a trade conflict, but a struggle for the architecture of the future global financial order. BRICS, seizing the moment while the United States is preoccupied with domestic problems and electoral battles, is aiming at the very core of American power, the dollar. Washington has already responded with tariffs, threats, and pressure, but the outcome of this confrontation will depend on whether the alliance can build a viable alternative and convince not only its members, but also dozens of Global South countries of its reliability. For the first time in many decades, U.S. monetary dominance is facing an organized challenge, and this challenge can no longer be ignored.